I told you the exit polls were not trustworthy. New information has come out about what really happened in the November elections that helps prove something I talked about at the time. All these news agencies rush to make pronouncements based on exit polls, which are notoriously untrustworthy. And these news agencies have every reason to know they should not trust these exit polls. A new analysis pulling together millions of pieces of data presents the first detailed picture of why people voted the way they did. It shows how much the media got wrong and why a theory that got a bunch of traction in mainstream media was the opposite of what happened. Of course, no major news outlets are taking responsibility for what they got wrong based on anything I'm seeing so far. Also, today, something that I think we are now ready for, nearly a year into this show. There is a term that the media uses for a small group of people. It's misguided and very problematic. It's even dehumanizing, a term I discussed last week. And it has been in the news in recent days. An attorney who gathers facts about this situation will join me to explain why people using this term to accuse other people of wrongdoing are actually the ones engaging in wrongdoing themselves. I know this sounds cryptic, but it will become clear. Plus, why a Hollywood former child star's realization about her mother carries such an important lesson. All that and more coming up today on They Stand Corrected. Hello and welcome. I'm Josh Lebs, and this is my podcast, They Stand Corrected, which fact-checks the news. This is episode 51, and this show has been weekly with no weeks off this entire time, which means that next week we will hit the 1-year mark. For those who have been with me in this adventure since the beginning, thank you so much. For all those who have joined ever since, thank you so much. Each week we have new people. You might be listening to this show for the first time right now. I encourage you, after you hear this one, to go back and binge the previous ones. Sometimes I refer to them, and you will hear the ethos of this show. It's about putting facts first, always. I spent 20 years in mainstream media, 10 on NPR, 10 on CNN, where I became lead on-air fact checker. I saw during that time how incredibly much is wrong with the media. There are so many ways in which the media blows it on its job, from giving open mic nights to liars to failing to fact check their own reporters. News agencies are not pulling through for you. This show is all about fixing that and showing the media that they stand corrected. With each episode, I send out a newsletter packed with links, videos, and more. I don't expect you to take my word for anything. I also explain how you can get in touch with me, send me ideas. A lot of what I share on this show was brought to me by listeners. And you can also tell me if I got something wrong. I look forward to doing segments called I Stand Corrected because I want to show everyone it's fine to get something wrong if you made a good faith effort in the first place and you correct yourself. The newsletter is free, but paid subscribers get special additional content. To celebrate the year mark of this show, you will see that there are special rates available. If you have gotten anything out of this show over the past year, becoming a paid subscriber to the newsletter is a great way to show appreciation. Plus, I show my paid subscribers how they can drop their paid subscriptions to major news outlets that are failing them and still access just about any article for free legally. All right, the topic I'm starting off with today is a perfect example of what They Stand Corrected is all about. Right after the election, there were all these claims based on exit polls. But as I explained at the time, news agencies themselves have in the past pointed out the problems with exit polls. There's one historic example that is a good way to see this. After the election in 2016, there was this popular belief that more than half of white women voted for Trump over Hillary Clinton. Months later, when much more trustworthy data came in, it turned out that was most likely not the case. They basically tied within that group, which is still disappointing to a lot of people. But nevertheless, the idea that he had gotten a majority of white women was cemented in the minds of millions of people. After the 2024 election, we saw all sorts of pronouncements as well. But now we have an analysis. It's by a group called Blue Rose Research. This is a Democratic firm, but they don't seem to be interested in spin. They seem to really want to know facts so that they can help Democratic candidates do better in the future. Their analysis is big. It's based on millions of data points from millions of people. It includes precinct level data, which means that they can dig into how people voted in different areas. If what you got in your data for each precinct comes close to what the precinct itself had in terms of its vote, you start to find that you have most likely much more trustworthy data. Anyway, this is not final, but this is the most detailed thing we have so far. It shows some media spin right after the election was straight up wrong. One thing I reported was how news agencies were making these demographic claims. For example, here's CNN that night.
How about among black voters? It was the best performance for a Republican candidate for president in 48 years since Gerald Ford back in 1976.
As I pointed out at the time, there were other reports saying there was no significant change among black voters. So, which was it? Well, based on this new research, there's no sign of Democrats in this past election losing any large number of black voters. You might hear otherwise from some news agencies that don't look closely at this data, so let me explain this carefully. In general, people who consider themselves conservative have been moving toward the Republican Party. That's not surprising. Black voters are no exception. Black voters who consider themselves conservative are still overwhelmingly voting for Democrats. But little by little, they have been moving away from the Democratic Party, giving Republicans a chance to pick up some small number of votes in that bloc. Black voters who call themselves moderates have barely changed at all in recent elections. If anything, a tiny, just barely perceptible movement toward Republicans. Black voters who consider themselves liberal, no change. It also does not show a shift among white voters. Some white voters went from Republican over to Democrat in 2020, which makes sense if you look back. It was during COVID. There were a lot of people very fed up with Trump. And it looks like white voters, according to this, went right back to form in 2024. No big change there. One thing this new research does point out is that among young men, Trump won. There is a huge gender gap among young people, with young men going heavily Republican. And that includes young men of color, as this study put it. According to this, the youngest white women also went for Trump, but it's close to the 50% line, and I don't want to make any big pronouncements based on that either. Either way, conventional wisdom about young voters being more Democratic and more progressive voters is not the case, according to this. Here is David Shore, head of data science at Blue Rose Research, speaking to the New York Times.
This is the thing I am the most shocked by, I think, in the last 4 years, is that young people have gone from being the most progressive generation since the baby boomers, and maybe in some ways more so, to becoming potentially the most conservative, generation that we've experienced maybe in 50 to 60 years.
That brings us to one of the most ridiculous failures of the post-election analysis in the media. There were media figures claiming that Kamala Harris was not progressive enough. I mentioned at the time this one piece in the New York Times by this guy, Peter Beinart, who has a career based around preaching hatred for Israel. So many people want to have an op-ed published in the New York Times. It's considered prime real estate in the world of opinion. And the most read day is Sundays. Imagine all the people in the country clamoring to be heard the Sunday after the election in the New York Times. And what does the New York Times do? Somehow they managed to have a half-page spread for this one guy who has no clue what he's talking about. The headline says, Democrats ignored Gaza and brought down their party. This was filled with nonsensical arguments, misreadings of data, no mentions of the October 7th massacres by Hamas in Israel or Hamas terrorist attacks in general. Beinart spent this piece saying disproven things about Israel and insisting that the war, quote, triggered one of the greatest surges in progressive activism in a generation. And he kept talking about young voters. He was not alone in claiming stuff like this. There's a guy on MSNBC named Iman Molden who tried to make a similar argument that two members of what's called the Squad in Congress, a group of far-left progressive anti-Israel people, that them winning re-election somehow showed that Kamala should have gone more anti-Israel like them. One of them is Rashida Tlaib, who regularly lies about Israel. She represents Dearborn, Michigan, which has the largest concentration of Arab voters.
In the end, voters in Dearborn voted for Trump over Harris. Congresswoman Tlaib triumphantly sailed to re-election from those very same voters in Dearborn. The message could not be more clear. Democrats desperately need new leadership.
New leadership? Maybe, but not the ones he's talking about. Here's what this Blue Rose Research study found. voters saw Harris as more ideologically extreme than Trump. All right, voters saw her as too liberal, too progressive, the exact opposite of what these media figures are attempting to argue. This new study also looked at the top issues people cared about. The war in the Middle East was not in the top half, and terrorism outranked the war in the Middle East. In this survey, voters felt that Trump would be better on both. One argument you hear is that progressives must have stayed home. Well, that is not what this survey found either. This guy, David Shore, did an interview with Vox as well. And here's something he said, quote, "There were a lot of Democratic voters who were angry at their party last year, and they were mostly moderate and conservative Democrats, angry about the cost of living and other issues. Even though they couldn't bring themselves to vote for a Republican, a lot of them stayed home." He also said that if all registered voters had turned out, Trump would have won by even more. Here's what David Shore told the New York Times. This is him speaking with commentator and analyst Ezra Klein.
It's not just that New York Times readers are more liberal than the overall population. That's definitely true. It's that they're more liberal than they were 4 years ago, even though the country went the other way. And so there's this great political divergence, between people who consume all the news sources that we know about and read about versus the people who don't.
Why aren't people paying attention to these news sources? Well, as I've reported here, people don't trust them. Trust scores are really low. And the part of this that people in big news organizations refuse to acknowledge is that Americans have good reason not to trust them because they don't fact check, because they make space for crazy arguments that don't make any sense. They are not earning the attention of the public. So here's a thought for the New York Times and other major news agencies. Maybe if you stop putting your agenda ahead of what's factual and you focus instead on becoming trustworthy sources of truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth at all times, maybe you'll reach more people. One place to start could be on the topic that's coming up, something the media gets backward. The folks at Substack just showed me how to see these awesome notes that so many people send in when they become paid subscribers to the newsletter. To all those of you who have been sending these in, thank you so much. I have said I will read them on the show, and I will, but this is a very quick break, so I'm going to read you the most recent one. This comes from Karen, who lives in California. Thank you so much for the essential work you put into your podcast. I found it 2 days ago, and I listened to 8 episodes back to back. You are an essential resource for those of us who care about factual integrity and bias in news reporting. You deserve an award. Thank you for your commitment to integrity in the news media. Thank you so much, Karen, and I hope I did you justice in reading that. There were lots of exclamation points along the way. These notes are phenomenal. I'm still going through them. To join this community of paid subscribers that I message with and take ideas from, just go to joshlebs.com/newsletter. In recent days, there's been a bunch of reports about the co-director of a lying propaganda film, like this from PBS.
The Oscar-winning Palestinian director of the documentary No Other Land was released by Israeli authorities a day after soldiers detained him in the occupied West Bank. Hamdan Balal left an Israeli police station today with bruises on his face and blood on his clothes, he says, from being beaten by Israeli settlers and troops.
I've reported in the past that the term occupied West Bank is a misnomer. No one who is being nonviolent should face violence. As I record this, the details of what really happened there are not clear. We only know what his camp is claiming. But people are quick to believe it, partly because of this image they've gotten from the media of Israeli soldiers as evil. They aren't. They're working to protect a democracy. Although there's no doubt some troops in every military do awful things and should be held to account. That clip also included a claim of violence from quote-unquote Israeli settlers. And again, people instantly believe that that must be the case. All this is the same image that's inside the propaganda film. It presents this good guy Palestinians versus bad guy Israeli image. And Of course, the media eats that up because people in the media believe it. When I was at CNN, there were people who said to me straight up, I hate the settlers. They see this in a very two-dimensional way, as pure bad guys. Just the other day, when I was speaking in California, someone came up to me afterwards. She was so wonderful and thankful. And she asked me to talk about these settlers because she said she can't stand what they are doing, they as a group. This is where we get into something I mentioned at the top. I know this is going to sound like a non sequitur, but if you've been listening to this, then you know I do this sometimes. I jump over to a different topic very briefly just to get us focused, and then I come right back. So follow me here. There is a great book by this former Hollywood child star named Jeanette McCurdy. She wrote largely about abusive experiences with her mother when she was growing up. She describes going to a therapist and telling the therapist about how her mother had taught her calorie restriction, which is basically a version of starving yourself. The therapist told her that was a form of abuse. And Jeanette McCurdy explains that she got angry, rejected the whole concept of it. She left. The therapist got in touch and tried to get through to her, but she just wouldn't talk to this person. She was not in a position to hear that. When it comes to certain truths, there are things that everyone can have trouble hearing. That is normal. We get ideas in our heads, and then we build these structures around those ideas. Sometimes we think the idea is quite simple, and we give ourselves and our minds a sense of moral clarity. If we discover that any part of what we had at the core of that feeling was not exactly right or not that simple, we can get a fight or flight response. I see this in fact checking. It happens in lots of different ways, and this is a strong example of it. This whole idea of quote unquote the settlers. So many people feel that standing staunchly against this group that they have in their minds is a crucial moral act. They're deeply invested in that belief. But what if what they thought they knew about this group of people was wrong? The job of journalism is to always provide the truth, facts plus context. There are situations all over the world in which nations have gotten land through war, including defensive war, and then their citizens go live there, and they're not written off as being some horrible people. I have not found any other examples of people in these situations being called settlers by the media. If you see any, let me know. Since this propaganda film recently won an Oscar, there has been new attention given to this group of people, with no fact-checking, of course. I found an article in which someone did a really good job of explaining elements of history here. He is with a group called the American Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists. If you go to their website, the first thing you see is a picture of RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and Justice Elena Kagan. They're both liberal justices. Clearly, this is not some right-wing organization. Not that it should matter. What matters is not who says something. What matters is what's true. The guy I spoke with is Joel Margolis. Here's how he described the group.
We look at everything through a legal lens. All our pronouncements are based squarely on the law, and we are scrupulous about avoiding the kind of political mudslinging you often see in the news.
The article he wrote is at a website called JNS. I'll post it in the newsletter. He takes us back to something called the San Remo Treaty of 1920 and the Palestine Mandate of 1922. He explains that these documents still have legal weight to this day and why. Some of what he shares are legal arguments, yes, but you never hear these things in the news. Here he is.
Settler colonialism involves taking your own citizens, sending them to the foreign country, and you have your citizens take over their government, take over their industry, and everything else. That's what the Palestinians are trying to portray Israel as. But to me, and I think to reasonable lawyers, it's a silly concept because Israel was never a colony of any kind.
Could you give us the very basic idea of how people have this backward about who is the settler and who's not the settler in this area?
Sure. The Ottoman Empire ruled present-day Israel and surrounding territories, Gaza, West Bank, which is historically known as Judea and Samaria, and Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and present-day Jordan. All of those areas were colonies of the Ottoman Empire. The victors of World War I decided to remap the area and decolonize it. All of that remapping was blessed by the League of Nations. It wasn't forced through by any one colonial power. And in the case of the Palestine Mandate, it was actually voted on unanimously by the League of Nations. How often does a world body agree unanimously on anything? But Arab countries refused to view Israel as a product of decolonization, even though the surrounding states, the Arab states, were all products of the same act of decolonization. The concept of the San Remo Treaty was to carve out all of present-day recognized Israel and all of Gaza, all of Jerusalem, and all of Judea and Samaria for the state that became the State of Israel. The next step is in 1922. The Palestine Mandate went into effect. The British lawfully reserved the right to sever a portion to create one more Arab state that today is known as Jordan. What the British thought and hoped was that that would be a kind of a two-state solution. So the Arabs would stop trying to kill their Jewish neighbors. It turned out to be 77% of the original mandatory district of Palestine. The Arabs were not satisfied with 77%. They wanted 100%. So that brings us to 1947. The British threw up their hands, left it to the UN to decide. What the UN did was craft their own resolution called the UN Partition Plan. They were taking half of what was divided in 1922 and further dividing it. The Zionists reluctantly accepted it, but the Arabs did not. As a result, that partition plan was never made official.
So before Israel had to fight for independence in 1948, the last document with legal life goes back to the Palestine Mandate?
Yes. The San Remo Treaty is the international treaty, and that's how states are formed. Then 1922 was the Palestine Mandate. And that's how Israel can claim the land.
Okay, I'm jumping in here to skip ahead a bit. In 1967, Arab nations attacked Israel. Israel won. Israel ended up getting more territory that's more defensible. Part of the territory it got is west of the Jordan River, which it was originally going to have, and Jordan has not wanted it back. All right, one more jump now. I am old enough to remember 1993, when the Oslo Accords happened. Israel and Palestinian leaders made what was supposed to be an interim agreement, a giant step forward toward a permanent agreement for basically how to divvy up that area. And they separated it into 3 sections that became known as areas A, B, and C.
What changed among the Arabs who began to identify as Palestinians was a certain strategy to deliberately build out in very small villages in Area C without getting any Israeli building permits, to try and block off any type of Israeli community and to expand their self-styled concept of Palestinian land. There are literally thousands of these makeshift structures all over Area C, built there by design by the Palestinian Authority in very strategic points, like a chessboard. In some cases, Israel let the Palestinians build these. The hope was, if we just keep engaging with Palestinians and we keep negotiating with them, we'll eventually arrive at a two-state solution. Unfortunately, the Palestinians took it as a sign of weakness, and they became emboldened to build out more and more of these illegal villages.
This brings us to the propaganda film. Can you summarize for me the basics of what this documentary gets wrong?
The failure to provide the crucial legal context and factual context of what's going on. When you see a village or home or a chicken coop or an animal pen getting bulldozed, what the film doesn't tell you is who built that small outpost in the first place? Why did they build it in that particular spot? Who owned that land? And why was it demolished?
All right, I'm jumping in again. He explains that there has been a very long legal battle.
Some of the homes were demolished. They quickly rebuilt them, knowing very well that the new construction was just as illegal as the original construction.
Did they rebuild them in the same place?
Exactly. Finally, Israel's high court said there's no legal barrier to demolishing the outposts. That's when they were demolished, and that's the only action you see in the film.
By the way, a Supreme Court that is not entirely Jewish. So, if people who are in these makeshift camps and farms and stuff that were built in Area C, if they want to live outside an area controlled by Israel, they have every ability to, right?
Yes, in Area A, where 90% of Palestinians already live, that's up to the Palestinian Authority.
And if people who identify as Palestinian in the Area C want to apply to become Israeli citizens, they can.
Yes, for the most part, Palestinians in the West Bank refuse to become Israeli citizens for the same reason that they refuse to live by the Israeli zoning laws. They don't want to believe that Israel has any rights to those lands. Yeah,
Were any of these places around for centuries? The ones demolished, are they all relatively recent makeshift setups?
they're all recently makeshift set up and given Arab names, just as Arabs have given Arab names to Jerusalem. And all the Hebrew towns and villages, even those going back thousands of years.
There are complexities and legal arguments over how things should be divided, who should be allowed to live where. It is not black and white. That's the point. Here's a question for you. Have you heard any of these facts in the media? See, this is context. The media writes all of this off by creating a separate rule just for the people of Judea, Jews, by using the word settlers in this one case while ignoring what I've reported on in the past, actual occupations underway all over the world. If you have not heard episode 1 yet, I encourage you to go back and hear that. More to say about how all this fits together, the diversity within the U.S. electorate and the misrepresentations of people living in areas under the Oslo Agreement, plus an organ transplant after this. Signing a very simple and important petition, visiting a website that might interest you, joining a free webinar with someone you recognize from the news, or pledging future support for a group of medic heroes. Thanks to sponsored partnerships, at just about all times, there are free steps that you can take. Each time you do, using my unique links, a little bit of money comes to support this show. Find the links in the show notes or my newsletter. Democracy as a way of shaping a society is a recent phenomenon. The idea that people of different beliefs can and should have the right to be equal citizens, that is at the crux of democracy anywhere. It is in danger here and around the world. It's in danger from the far right here in America as Trump and his team work to dismantle the balance of power among the three branches. That is essential to prevent us from having a monarchy. And it's in danger from the far left, which claims to stand for equality, but stands staunchly against it, pushing anti-democratic Islamist governments that take away basic freedoms. Solving any problem means looking at reality, not what you wish to be the case. The reality of the 2024 election is a crucial starting point for the work that needs to be done in America. Knowing what really happened and why is essential. Everyone committed to democracy needs to recognize that the answer does not lie in far-left hate movements that mainstream news organizations have been whitewashing and pushing. The solution here lies in reaching more people with truth. We need the media to do that. And here and around the world, it requires a real look at what citizens of democracies are going through. You've been taught to hate citizens of one democracy in particular, especially those referred to by the ridiculous term, the settlers. I'm going to tell you about a man named Leo D. His wife and daughters were killed by Palestinian terrorists. They were just driving when terrorists shot them in their car, which led them to crash, and then the terrorists went up to the car and opened fire at close range, according to a bunch of news reports. Leo's wife, her name was Lucy. Her organs were salvageable and transplanted into 5 patients, one of whom happened to be an Arab patient. Leo said his wife would be so proud. That's normal. Israeli Jewish people slaughtered by terrorists have had organs donated to Arab people. Leo is a rabbi. He and his family lived in a town in what is referred to as the West Bank. When he was interviewed by journalists, he talked about his love for his Arab neighbors. Here's a clip from Israel National News.
I never got any guards. I don't have a gun. And I would spend the day working from home while they came, and we would end up chatting and having coffees together, talking about their kids, talking about our kids. We trusted them. I trusted them completely with the family. I still do. Complete trust and love. When I spoke to one of my friends recently, he said, "Look, Pashut, we love you." And I said, "I love you too," in tears.
Leo is the kind of person the media teaches you to hate. This loving man, part of a democracy, who wants peace for everyone. And there's another media story here. See, Leo can tell you about this love, about this friendship, about this connection. But Arab citizens, under the Palestinian Authority, they would vote in Palestinian Authority elections if the PA ever held them again. They cannot safely talk in the media about stuff like this because in an anti-democratic, authoritarian government, there is not a popular basic belief that everyone should be free to be who they are and be equal citizens. They would be in danger from their own societies if they spoke openly about their love and support for their Jewish Israeli neighbors and the fact that they hate the terrorists. Right now, in Gaza, some Palestinians have gotten up the courage to stand against Hamas, and they're being tortured and killed for it. People like Lucy D, of course, have organs donated to whoever needs them. But an Islamist government allowing its citizens to donate organs to Jewish people, that's unimaginable. This is about the entire take on humanity that comes along with democracy. As always, I would love to hear what you think. The best way is to be a paid subscriber to the newsletter. You get to message me right there or post in the comments. Anyone can find a form at my website, joshlevs.com. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you when we celebrate 1 full year next week.